business of the day. And today we're going to be talking about the League of Nations, our very first case study. All the theories, for the most part, are now over and done with. If you are now familiar with all of these theories, and you should certainly be, a lot of this material will come pretty easy for you. Now, we start with the League of Nations, even though we know that the League of Nations is, for the most part, a failure. Okay? The League of Nations is, in many circles today, kind of the epitome, the example of the failure of international consensus at halting another major conflict. Now, the parody of the League of Nations was that it was created in the wake of the First World War to prevent something like that from ever happening again. And then you jump 20 years into the future and, oh, look at that. We're doing the same thing again, but only this time even worse. Now, why then do we spend so much time on the League? Well, the League of Nations unfortunately does get its criticism. And most of that criticism is not unfounded. But yet at the same time, the League of Nations does two things for us. Number one, it is the first time that a truly modern attempt had been made at creating an international institution to try to put these ideas of liberalism into practice. And the second thing, probably more important than that, is that if the League of Nations was that much of a failure, we would not see its offshoot in action today. The League of Nations is probably more responsible than any other organization in creating which organization today that seems rather similar, but has a little bit more institutional teeth to it. The United Nations, right. Now, look, the United Nations is not a world governing body, right? The United Nations has its problems, but, even if we were to ascribe to the belief that even if liberal philosophies become the norm in international relations, it is a major step forward. And if we can prevent one war from taking place, then we're moving in that right direction, okay? When you think about the establishment of the League in the waning years of the First World War, you have to also understand that this is a relatively new concept. Now, IR theory has been effectively telling us that for decades, if not centuries, the premises of realism had, for the most part, been dominating the international arena. Right? States are the primary actors. States operate in the realm of uncertainty and unpredictability. You all know the drill, right? It's nothing out of the ordinary. The League of Nations is trying for the first time to put a halt to that, trying to stop that trend and saying, look, we've seen what the unpredictable nature of realism can give us, right, in the name of the First World War. Now, I know that it's somewhat difficult to comprehend this, given what's happened since. But the prevailing understanding in the wake of the First World War was that something this destructive could never happen again, right? You need to understand the level of intensity of violence, the type of mechanized warfare that defined the First World War, which almost seems quaint by today's standards, was still one of the worst things that humans had experienced. Okay? The wake of the First World War had placed a number of people in a number of very pessimistic camps. One, the nihilist camp. Another camp, the one that just, completely gives up on humanity. And the third camp, the Wilson camp, is saying, we better do something to stop this. Otherwise, the next war is going to be worse than that. Okay? So even though we take a look, even though we can see that, people like Bismarck and Machiavelli and the Kaiser and, kings and dukes and sultans, whatever, were largely products of their time, right? We could say that Bismarck was, one of the best offshoots of realism, in the sense that his way of thinking, his strategizing, perfectly encapsulates that international arena of self-help. But Woodrow Wilson was also a product of his time. And there's a reason why I was trying to emphasize a couple of weeks ago that Wilson really is a product of academia. Before he was president of the United States, he was president of Princeton University. And within that academic setting, he is a little bit more aware and a little bit more appreciative of these philosophies of John Locke, Immanuel Kant, Adam Smith, among others. So we have to give credit to Wilson as well for taking a different set of policies and trying to make that the standard by which future international relations can operate within. So the League of Nations may be seen now in hindsight as a colossal failure, but we also have to give credit to the League of Nations as being a product, probably a trendsetter in enlightened thinking, which is something that, if it was not addressed at the time, would have resulted in greater carnage. So if there is this concerted effort at getting all sides to play by the same rules of the game, rather than humans leading themselves towards extinction via warfare, or better yet, just new and more interesting ways of killing each other, we just might be able to harness that same degree of ingenuity towards the light side of the force, as opposed to the dark side. Wilson was a major believer in democratic peace theory. And the United States, along with Great Britain, were also major practitioners of philosophies like commercial pacifism. Now, it takes maybe a strong state to set the mold for all other states to follow, which may, give us a moment to pause by saying, look, the League itself may be somewhat of a paradoxical phenomenon. Because on one level, the League is calling for the input of all states. All states are equal states. All states have equal voice in membership. Yet, at the other side of the coin, in order to get to that happy, hippy-dippy promised land, you're going to actually need a few enlightened states like the United States, Great Britain, and France when they're, behaving themselves, to move the international set of thinking into that way of thinking, if you understand what I'm saying, right? It's going to take maybe one or two or three powerful states to create that hegemonic framework. So the League of Nations is both reliant on collective agreement, but it is before that even more reliant on the notion that powerful states are going to use their influence, diplomatic influence, to set the standard for future developments. In that case, the League of Nations is a great liberalist experiment. Whether or not it succeeded or failed, and as we're going to realize today in class, the League of Nations was both a success and a failure for a number of reasons. But it is a successful liberalist experiment in that it not only seeks to reinstate an earlier form of international collective security that builds off of what was known as the Concert of Europe. The Concert of Europe from roughly 1815 to 1914. How many people here are familiar? How many people have heard of the Concert of Europe before? Adam, just as a quick thing, just what exactly is the Concert of Europe?
After the Napoleonic Wars, the countries of the superpowers of Europe basically got together and they created a just sort of a general understanding that any revolutions or any attempts to displace the old order would be put down.
Okay, so the Concert of Europe, as I think you very aptly point out, was an agreement by the powerful European countries, which were about 4 or 5. Can we name, what were some of these powerful European countries between 1815 and 1914?
Austria.
Austria-Hungary being one, very good.
Russia.
Russia being another, good. 3 more to go. Actually, you went through 2 of the tougher ones, so the other ones should be rather self-explanatory.
Great Britain.
When in doubt, Great Britain's always a good answer to give. And if Great Britain's going to be there, you have to include the other country that's right across the water.
I was going to say Prussia, but...
Well, Prussia, Germany, whatever they happen to be that day. Okay, that's 4. I'll take it. I will happily take it, whether it's Prussia or Germany or the Holy Roman Empire, whatever they happen to be. All right, and one final one.
France.
And France. Okay, Great Britain, France, Germany, Prussia, Holy Roman Empire, whatever it is they are that day, the Austrian Empire, and Russia. Okay? The idea basically was these 5 countries would try to keep Europe pacified. And for the most part, unless some, little argument flared up in the Balkans, Europe was for the most part pacified. Here's the difference. League of Nations is going to build on this concert of European systems by adding philosophies of peace and social development. The Concert of Europe was, for the most part, an act of containment and balance of power. Concert of Europe was more or less an international leviathan. It's more of a Thomas Hobbesian approach. League of Nations was going to switch over from Hobbes and go total John Locke and do social contracts. Okay? So it's not the first, but it is certainly the first globally. Because the League of Nations is not just going to talk about Europe. They're also going to look at Middle East, Africa, Asia, and the Americas as well. The League of Nations is also going to, for the first time, actually uphold the principles of the Westphalian model. Right? If you remember from our first day of class, the Treaty of Westphalia talks about the sanctity of sovereign states. And the big thing here is that sovereign states are beholden to the citizens who live there, not the divine right of kings, not some type of absolutist imperial control, and borders should remain internationally recognized. And obviously, 1648 to 1918, borders have significantly changed. Woodrow Wilson was a big fan of redrawing borders all over the world. And even though things got a little dicey in Europe, they became even more embedded and problematic in the Middle East. But still, once these borders were drawn up, once empires and colonial powers of the losing powers were broken up, and here you've got Austria-Hungary, sort of devolving into about 4 or 5 different states, Ottoman Empire, the Russian Empire, Japanese, everything like that. Okay? What you end up looking at is this notion that there are a whole bunch of new states out there today, and they have membership in this organization. This organization is not only going to uphold the basic principles of the Westphalian model, but they are going to be the very first institution to apply the concept of international laws and norms to all of its members. So, more than just simply continuing the Concert of Europe, the League of Nations, under the hypothetical and proposed enlightened leadership of the United States, you do of course know that the United States was kind of assumed to be, the guy in charge. What happened to the United States as far as the League of Nations was concerned?
The United States became an isolationist state again after the...
Yeah, the United States has this chronic problem. Every time that we try to liberate a good chunk of the world, for the next 20 years, the very same people, we're done with the people. Now we're just going to kind of isolate ourselves. Call us if there's a major problem, but otherwise, screw you. Right? So, yes, the United States was not a member of the League, which was a major, major handicap. Because most people were expecting Woodrow Wilson to assume the control of the League of Nations by stepping down from the presidency. In a parallel universe, that may have existed. In this universe, it did not. But the understanding was that the League of Nations was going to be the first liberalist institution applying these principles, philosophies, dare I say, to the international arena. Not bad, not bad. But realists are always lurking around the corner and saying, hang on a second, before you start singing turn, 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 give peace a chance, okay? The realists are always this sobering buzzkill in any happy thoughts, okay? Because in hindsight, the executive powers of the League, and it's all the more apparent when the United States steps down, and which 2 countries basically assume effective leadership, if not the guiding directional force in the League of Nations, right? Who are the 2 countries here?
Great Britain and France.
Great Britain and France, right? Okay, so not bad. We've got ourselves 2 democracies. Here's a problem, though. Great Britain and France both of them still have one thing. They both have things. Both of them have one thing. That kind of flies in the face of the League, flies in the face of self-determination, flies in the face of the sanctity of borders. They didn't have to give this up after the First World War. As a matter of fact, they actually expanded it after the First World War. And colonies. They still had all their houses and hotels on the monopoly board. Okay? As a matter of fact, they ended up getting more by carving up the Arabian part of the Ottoman Empire. So the realists are going to look at this and If you've read Carr, you can tell he's a bitter old SOB. But the executive powers comprised Western European powers who conveniently won the previous war, conveniently set the terms of peace from the previous war, and never really gave up their own overseas possessions. So the realists are saying, okay, the League of Nations may sound nice, and yeah, everything sounds good on paper, communism sounds good on paper, oh hell, even fascism sounds good on paper, okay? But in real life, states still are operating under their own self-interest. And they're going to look at the world, not in what benefits humanity, but what benefits their bottom line. And, the United States, we could say, well, the United States was not involved, so it would have made the world a better place. That's kind of a straw man argument, because we don't know what the United States would have done. We've seen what the United States can do when they do play the role of international arbiter. I'm not all that happy with them, but we're not going to talk about the US today. We're going to make fun of London and Paris instead. Okay? So the realists kind of ask a couple of questions which liberals are finding a bit hard to answer. What are the legalities of precedents being set by dominant powers? In other words, you set the stage for what is right, what is moral, what is legal. Is being legal something that is moral? And when do you decide to enforce justice? When do you decide to enforce the law? And when do you decide to kind of look the other way and buck the system? It's a bit difficult to take seriously the League when arbitration is done less in the interest of its members, but more in the interest of those powers. Okay? And if you haven't read Carr, wait until you read him. Because he is very, very critical of what he sees as the relative naivete of post-war liberalist thinking. This kind of sets the stage for neoclassical realists. Very short period of time, from roughly the interwar period up until the moment Ken Wold started publishing his books. Okay? Neoclassical realism kind of looks at liberalism and says, wow, you guys are way too trusting in the world. Way too trusting. Okay? The fact that the United States was absent because of its isolationist vote is also indicative. The United States could have invested its time, its energy, and its resources into effectively regulating the international arena. What did the United States do? The United States basically voted against Wilson's own brainchild. The Republicans in Congress were on an isolationist mood. They said, we're done with the war. We're done with how many people did we ship overseas? How many of them died to fight some other person's war? Screw that. Okay? And poor Woodrow Wilson ends up suffering a debilitating stroke while still in the White House, and his legacy goes from what would have been a major international leader to a rather sad and anticlimactic end, to a rather charismatic and intellectual individual. Okay? So the League of Nations also gives us a lot of good examples in collective action, both positive and negative. League of Nations is a fantastic example of both self-help as well as collective benefits. On the one end, the League of Nations was the first attempt at providing, if not at least ensuring, collective security for all, and a chance for smaller states to enjoy the benefits of input from larger states. Now, if you juxtapose the League from the Concert of Europe, Concert of Europe basically says that there are at least two tiers of states, if not three. The alphas, Great Britain, France, Austria, Prussia, Russia. That's it. We're the ones on top. We're the ones that make policy. Second-tier countries, Spain, Portugal, Serbia, Montenegro, the Romanian states, and whatever Italy is thinking of doing that day. Okay? And the countries that get punked, well, usually it's the Ottoman Empire or any other colony. The League of Nations does away with tiers. The League of Nations basically says that if you are a member of the League, it doesn't matter whether you are as powerful as Great Britain or as quaintly pathetic as Ethiopia, you are a member. And each of these members has a voice in the institutional setting. That itself is a groundbreaking phenomenon. as far as modern IR studies are concerned. Now, let's take that philosophy aside and get more, well, realistic. Because with that many members from different geographic areas and varying socioeconomic interests, it is difficult, if not impossible, in reaching consensus on any issues. The smaller states are probably going to adhere to the philosophies of international law, because that's all that they've got. The larger countries realize that they can speak in favor of international law, but oftentimes international law undercuts their own security, undercuts their own advantage. Now, you've got a choice. You can either be the big person, adhere to the philosophies, and undercut your own security for the sake of general consensus. Or if you have the money to get out of getting that speeding ticket, you're going to play that money. You're going to play that card. Or you're going to play that strategy. If you have the leverage to get what you want, are you going to use it or are you going to forget about it? More often than not, you're going to use it, especially if you get something in the end. You're going to play the international law card only when the outcome has little to no bearing on your national security. Let me repeat that. You're only going to play the international law card, you're only going to adhere to the principles of international whatever, if and only if the outcome has no bearing on your security or your power. Okay? With all of that said, let's take a look at some essential features of the League of Nations. At least on paper, all right? This is what we end up getting. All right, number one. All members, all participating members, were to respect the territorial integrity of each other. Right? Full stop. All participating members are to respect the borders and the territorial integrity of each other's members. That is played out even today in the United Nations. Again, I emphasize on paper. Okay? On paper. Number two, the League of Nations also pioneers this understanding that an attack on one is an attack on all, which is something that we see extended today in NATO. Okay? The outbreak of war results in the League overwhelmingly condemning and isolating the perpetrating country, which can include a number of things: diplomatic isolation, economic sanctions, expulsion from the League, and, if necessary, the legal means for military mobilization against. So for the first time, the League of Nations tries to codify the legality of war and make going to war against an aggressive country a legal necessity. Number three, any disputes between two conflicting countries should, no, scratch that, not should, shall be arbitrated by the League. In the olden days, you had a problem with a neighbor, what was it? War is politics by other means, okay? In the League, well, before we play the Clausewitz card, maybe we can kind of take it to some type of higher international arbitration. Because even if a compromise is reached, even if that compromise sort of benefits and also impinges both sides, what's the bottom line? The bottom line is war is avoided. If we can avoid war, that is a victory. Okay? And number four, penalties for defection, which means not adhering to anything above, resulted also in collective sanction. So it wasn't that you just simply had to invade another country. If you just stopped adhering to the principles of the League, if you started doing things on your own, you started making up your own rules, you were subjected to collective sanction from the League. So the League is effectively saying, look, everybody has to follow these sets of laws. That's the social contract. That's what you do in order to ensure peace and harmony. And if you don't do that, some type of punishment will be meted out. Okay, that's all fine and nice, but there needs to be some kind of leadership. There needs to be some kind of guiding force within this organization because, heck, we've got ourselves anywhere from 50 to 85 members by the 1920s. Now, it's one thing to get everybody all sitting down at once and agreeing on this and that and that and this, but trust me, you're going to need a couple of countries to kind of regulate the whole darn thing. And therefore, we need an executive council. The executive council was originally designed to include 5 countries: the United States, Great Britain, France, Italy, and Japan. Surprise, surprise. The countries that won the First World War or were smart enough to side with the winning side just before the treaties were signed. Good job, Italy. That's what Italy always does. Okay, what's Italy's military strategy? Sit back, check to see which side's winning. Oh, I'm going to go with that guy. Okay, yeah, we won every war. Yeah, good for you, Italy, you know? Like I said, Italy is fantastic when it's a second-rate power. It's horrible when it's a first-rate power. Man, you guys are awesome as a second-rate power. Okay, the United States, Great Britain, France, Italy, and Japan. Surprise, surprise, the countries that won the First World War. Now, I put the United States in red, simply because the U.S. declined that invitation. So there was a seat that was open, right? The idea kind of was like, hey, America, whenever you want, you can come over. Kind of like, I wouldn't be surprised, kind of like in the European Union. There's a seat that's still open for Norway, whenever they want to join. There's a seat also available for Switzerland. If they should just decide to just walk in. Hey guys, we were like, oh my God, yay. You don't even have to apply, you're in, right? So kind of the same thing for the United States. Germany and what becomes the Soviet Union were not original members. Germany didn't join until the 1920s. Okay? Germany's on the losing side. And the Soviet Union doesn't join because the Soviet Union is just angry at everybody for a couple of years. Okay? That's what the Soviets basically do. Okay? But you know what? Even if the United States joins, and we look at Germany and the Soviet Union do get executive council membership by the mid-1920s, that's 7 countries that, oh look, surprise, surprise, it basically makes up the Concert of Europe. It makes up the exact same Concert of Europe system with the United States, and yeah, we're really hoping Italy's going to do something funny. Okay? We got all 7 of them. So in that regard, the main countries were great powers. But again, let's be honest here for a minute. What other states were there? What other states were there? This is sort of the thing about liberalism. Liberalism likes to think that everybody can be equal, but in order to get there, you need a couple of enlightened powers in the beginning to kind of guide everybody through. So even in the most optimistic sense, you could say, all right, so maybe for the first, I don't know, 15, 20 some odd years, we have these 7 powers that are kind of getting everybody to think, you know, like rational thinking Democrats. Are they ever going to give up their status? That's another question. Will they ever give up that executive status? Well, what's the likelihood of any country in the United Nations today? So what's the likelihood of any UN Security Council, permanent member Security Council country, going to give up their executive veto? No, it's not going to happen. It will not happen. It won't ever happen. Okay? So right then and there, the mold has been set for the League to still be already tiered in a certain way. All right. With all of that said, though, I do want to point out the League did have some successes. Now, before we get to the blooper reel, we should get to the accomplishments. Okay. Now, I'm going to assume that none of you know anything about the Aland Island crisis of 1920. I'm also going to assume that very few of you even know what the Aland Islands are or where the Aland Islands are. Okay? That's all fine and good, right? Just follow me down the list here. The Aland Islands was the first and probably most successful League of Nations arbitration. The Aland Islands are a group of islands in the, I believe it's the North Sea or this Baltic Sea, or it don't matter. It's up there in Scandinavia, which already tells you why it's going to succeed. Okay, Scandinavians are just so annoyingly following the rules of everything, okay? And here, you're right between the 2 countries, between Sweden and Finland, so how could this possibly fuck up, okay? The Aland Islands are a bunch of islands that are formally controlled by Finland. They are under Finnish control, they're under Finnish sovereignty, but the islands are overwhelmingly populated by ethnic Swedes. Okay? So ethnic Swedes live on the islands. The islands are disputed between Sweden and Finland. Now, The likelihood of Sweden and Finland going to war, seeing as how both countries were democratic, is already highly unlikely. That still does not mean that the crisis was going to be averted. What ends up happening is that both countries take their grievances over who controls these islands to the League. The League comes up with a very successful, and I would say very thorough policy in which the Åland Islands are given significant degrees of autonomy within Finland, which means that Finland retains control of the islands, but the people who are on the island, Swedes, have access to their own educational system, their own economic planning, free trade, and unfettered access of communication with Sweden. And in return, Sweden agrees that the islands will be part of Finland. Does that make sense? Right? Effectively, what we end up looking at with the Åland Islands was the first internationally mediated solution for autonomy. And to this very day, the Åland Islands are functioning quite well. And that's pretty much all there is to say about the Åland Islands. Okay? But it's a relatively positive success story. Now, I'm sure you all know about the Greek-Bulgarian border dispute of 1925. Who doesn't? It's such a hot topic. Okay? Now, for the very few of you in class that don't know anything about it, I'm going to fill you in on this juicy bit of detail. Okay? Greece and Bulgaria had a border dispute in 1925. Okay? And Bulgaria, well, see, Bulgaria had basically been threatening war with pretty much all of its neighbors since the mid-1870s. They have this unfettered fascination, this unfettered control, wanting to control things like Thrace and Macedonia and everything else like that. Now, Greece and Bulgaria almost went to war. See, this is not Scandinavia, this is the Balkans. When countries say they're going to go to war in the Balkans, they make good on their promises. Okay? Now, the League of Nations gets involved here as well, because what they don't want is that a small little tiff in the Balkans can easily spill over into a larger brush fire. Because the minute that Greece and Bulgaria get involved, you know for a fact that it's just a matter of time before Turkey decides to flex its own muscles as well. And the minute Turkey gets involved, oh crap, not this again. Okay? So the League steps in and offers to effectively arbitrate the problems of Greece and Bulgaria and where they put the border. Make long story short, the League basically says that the border remains as is. And Bulgaria and Greece basically agree, okay, cool, we'll just take our toys and go home. Now, the difference is that Greece and Bulgaria had very little chance of going to war because both countries had been economically and militarily exhausted from the First World War. Greece had effectively been at war since 1912 and just finished up a disastrous military campaign with Turkey in 1922 and 1923. So 2 years later, having lost all of its possessions and people and land in Asia Minor, and having to absorb over 1.5 million Greek refugees from Anatolia, the last thing Greece needed was another war. So they were more than happy to have this conflict arbitrated by the UN. Okay? So that's number two. Not bad. Right? Autonomy for the Åland Islands. Hey, Balkans. Cut that out. Number three. Treaty of Locarno. Sort of. Treaty of Locarno is basically a reassessment of the peace agreements between the Allied powers and Germany, 1926. Two things come out of this. Actually, three things. Number one, the French-German border is defined, and Germany recognizes that its western borders are inalienable and uncontested. The French agree, the Germans agree, it's all good. This is good for the French because the Germans give up their claims to Alsace-Lorraine. The other thing, though, is that we leave the eastern border up for discussion at some later point. Sorry, Holmes. Okay? But what it also does is it kind of restructures Germany's post-war debts and reparations to a more equitable, it's kind of funny, Germany got debt relief. Isn't that cute, Germany? Okay? Take that. Germany gets debt relief because of its crippling war debt because they can't pay their debts. Gee, Germany needs to go back in history and know what happened to them, as opposed to what they do to Greece. But Germany is given membership in the League of Nations. So, not bad. The Calais-Briand Pact of 1928, another good example, in which all participating members of the League agree, in theory, to kind of like renounce warfare or something like that. You know, like we agree that we're just not going to use war as an option to settle disputes, which, you know, kind of reaffirms one of the main constitutional provisions of the League. Okay, so that's four things. Aland Islands, Greek-Bulgarian border dispute, Treaty of Locarno, Calais-Briand Pact. 1920s, not bad. Notice, however, all of this happened before one fateful year. 1929. Okay? So when things are going okay, everybody's playing by the rules of the game. 1929, well, we'll wait till we get to the blooper reel. Now, the thing to understand here is that these were successful for two reasons. One, the aggrieved parties agreed to follow the solutions that were offered to them. Neither Sweden, nor Finland, nor Greece, nor Bulgaria sought to violate these treaties and go to war. So that's good. And number two, if you really want to play the realist card, the great powers also agreed to play by the rules of the game. They may have acted as judge, juror, and executor, but here's the important thing. The great powers agreed to also follow international law. The great powers agreed to play by the League's standards and not come up with solutions of their own. That's what I just said before. The great powers can make this thing work also if and only if they do not see their own security and their own national interests in jeopardy. So one thing that we can take away from the League, even before we move on, is that liberalism works when realism sees no reason to rear its head.